Benjamin Netanyahu is here. He is Israel's finance minister, also a former prime minister. He met with Vice President Dick Cheney yesterday. So welcome.
Well, thank you, Charlie. If you ask me about the economy, I'd be very appreciative.
You'd be happy to talk about it.
Yeah, sure.
What's happening in Israel to the economy?
Well, what happened was we were on the brink of financial collapse a year and a quarter ago when I took over as finance minister. Prime Minister and I worked together. We cut spending, cut welfare, cut the bureaucracy, cut taxes, took over the pension funds of the unions, which were in actuarial bankruptcy, raised the retirement age for men and women, privatized El Al. They've been talking about it for 17 years. It took us 3 months. Privatized the shipping company. Now we're selling off the banks, the telecoms, making it a very robust, dynamic economy. So the results, in short, the economy last quarter grew 5.5%. Stock market has more than doubled. It's grown 100% in 12 months. Our long-term government bond rates have been slashed. That means that people will buy your bonds for lesser interest because they trust you. And money is flowing in. Investment is coming in. Israel is a very, very good deal. So I'm giving you a good stock tip.
Where did you get your own economic ideas?
Oh, well, I've had these ideas for many years. I went to the business school at MIT. I worked in a consulting firm, major international consulting firm, the Boston Consulting Group.
Right.
And I had these ideas and implemented some of them when I was prime minister, but now I had a lot of time. You know, when I left office, I had time to kill. So I went around the world and I saw what everybody was doing. And when I was offered this opportunity, I said, okay, but I need to run the economic cabinet because that gives me the ability to actually make the decisions, and the privatization committee. And once the prime minister agreed to that, we went and, we went rapidly. And I try to explain to the public what it is we were doing. And I fell back on an image of my first day in basic training in the paratroops in the Israeli army. They put us on a line, on a big field, in a straight line, and I was the first guy on the left. And the commander said, every man look to his right and put the guy to his right on his shoulders, which I did. And the guy next to me was a big guy about my size, and I remember the crushing weight. The guy next to him was the smallest guy in the platoon. He was a Yemenite. He had the biggest guy to put on his shoulders. The third guy was a big guy. He had a little guy, and so on. And then they blew the whistle, and we started racing. This is called the elephant race.
Right.
I managed to take a few steps. The Yemenite collapsed on the spot. The big guy just took the little guy and just ran all the way to the end. I said, all economies and global economies are pairs of a public sector sitting on the shoulders of a private sector. Ours was getting prohibitively big, right, and crushing the weight of the private sector. So we have to put the fat guy at the top on a diet, and we have to put the little guy at the bottom. We have to strengthen him, put him on a treadmill, weight training, and remove all obstacles in his way. That's essentially what we've been doing with very, very, very good results. Very good results.
You had a meeting with Dick Cheney, the vice president. Yeah. What was that about?
About everything you can think of.
You just stopped by to check in?
No, we were in an economic conference, really, in a think tank conference in Denver, Colorado. Alan Greenspan was there, reaffirming my view that, first of all, giving very good marks to the Israeli economy. Secondly, telling me that excess revenues from cutting taxes, you cut tax rates, you get more tax revenues. Hard for people to understand that in Israel. And then the question is, what do you do with these tax revenues? Well, you don't increase government spending. You reduce taxes further, and the economy keeps on growing. Greenspan said, do it. So I was very happy with that. While we were there, the vice president talked about the war on terror, the need to pursue it, their appreciation that Israel is acting unilaterally because it doesn't really have a partner, because Arafat is not a partner, and because no one under him has the courage to break off from him and to create a genuine move for peace. So we are really forced to act unilaterally to increase our security as we have.
Did the Prime Minister act unilaterally because of the demographic argument, or did he act because there was no way to negotiate, or there was no negotiating partner that had sufficient, as you say, authority and credibility?
I think the demographic argument is already behind us because nobody in his right mind will incorporate 2 million Palestinians into the Israeli state. And effectively, they've got their own government right now. So that's not the issue. But there is spillage of terrorists from the Palestinian areas into our cities. It was said there's nothing you can do about it. Well, it turns out we can, and we have. We've built a fence, a physical separation, a barrier. That has not been penetrated even once. We have taken action, offensive action, against the terrorist leadership and their strongholds, and we have very good intelligence. The result has been this, that despite the fact that at any given time for the last year, the number of terrorist suicide attempts is constant, being around 40, at any given time, including now. The ability to actually complete those suicide terrorist missions has gone right to the ground. We went from sometimes 2 a day or 2 a week to once every several months now. And that's not because the terrorists are not trying. It's because they're not succeeding because of our offensive and defensive means. So Israel now has improved security, vastly improving security. You can't tell if you're watching the screens and you think Iraq, Saudi Arabia. No, in Israel it's actually improving dramatically because of these actions. And secondly, we've liberated the economy. And the result has been improved security, economic growth. I'm actually very hopeful about Israel. You're looking at the one optimist in the Middle East right now.
About Israel?
About Israel.
All right, let me come back to Israeli and Israel. What's the relationship between you and Ariel Sharon?
Pretty good.
Is it really?
It's not
I mean, you're in competition for the, and this has been fought out in Likud conventions on a variety of issues. I mean, you two guys are in competition, but are you now part of the same cabinet? Are you cooperating? Is it a good relationship? Do you agree on most strategic issues?
Well, first of all, we forged an agreement on the last issue on the Gaza pullout plan.
I know you did. Yeah, but I mean, you had to forge an agreement. You didn't just get in line.
Sure. No, actually, I supported him initially and said that we can reduce the risk of just pulling out and having that seen as a victory for
But didn't you ask him to
Palestinian
make some
terrorists.
Compromises to his original plan?
No, what I asked him to do was to make sure that we control the entry points into Gaza so that rockets from the Sinai do not enter, and that a few other things that he eventually agreed to, so I supported him. He then decided to take this to a Likud referendum and lost, which put all of us who committed ourselves to the results of the referendum in a bind, including him, first and foremost. So the thought was, how can you continue with a pullout when your own party, to which you committed to respect its outcome, its decision, decided against the pullout? And that took a while. We worked on that for a while and figured out a way to get a compromise, which essentially said, we'll make all the preparations.
Okay. Is the end result going to be a coalition with Labor?
I don't know. I think that I hope that we have, and I'm working to maintain as much as I can on my end, a stable coalition so we can do two things.
So you don't have to go to Labor?
I don't care if it's Labor or if it's any other party, as long as we continue the economic reforms to break up the monopolies, streamline the government, and secondly, to continue on the line that we agreed, Sharon and I, the Prime Minister and I agreed on a plan that allows us to control the rate of withdrawal based on what we see conditions on the ground. If terror is big, I don't think you're going to see us leave. If terror is reduced, I think you'll probably see us entertain that possibility in stages.
What do you think should be done about Arafat?
I advocated a long time expelling him, and I still think that his presence there is like a poison mushroom that doesn't allow any alternative leadership to emerge on the part of the Palestinians, to their detriment and ours.
But should the Israelis be trying to determine who is the leadership of the PLO?
Yes, if the guy is dispatching terrorists and is 200 suicide bombers against you, of course you can. It's not a moral issue. This man refused an offer.
Yeah, but it's not for you to choose who their leaders are.
No, but it's for us to say that if you are conducting 200 terrorist attacks, suicide attacks against us, 200, mind you, 200. It's the equivalent of 200, not World Trade Centers, but in terms of population, it's like 60, 70,000 Americans were killed, 20 times the World Trade Center. If somebody's doing that, then I don't think he has a legitimate tenure there. But this is subject to
you were for expulsion, not assassination.
Yes, I said so.
Is there anybody who are the most prominent proponents of assassination? The chief of staff? Who else? The defense minister?
I'm not sure it's a useful topic, but I can say right now that these questions.
There are people who
yes,
are arguing within the highest levels of the Israeli government.
Oh yes.
And publicly.
Oh sure. There are many. There are others who said other things, but
my impression is that's no longer a subject of discussion because of pressure from the Bush administration.
Look, I don't think there's any love lost between President Bush and his administration, Yasser Arafat. I think they figured him out.
Yeah, but I don't think. I mean, Secretary Powell's made it pretty clear. The United States does not want to see him.
Yes, they have.
attacked.
Yes, it's true. They have made it clear.
And you're not going to go against the wishes of the United States on this issue?
Well, I think that we have this is one consideration, among others. By the way, some other considerations also pointing in that same direction. It depends on the situation, but the important thing is this. I think that right now there's an agreement that we don't have a partner. Because we don't have a partner, it doesn't mean we sit back and do nothing. We can shore up our security by completing the security fence. It works. It saved lives. And by the way, not only Israeli lives, it saves Palestinian lives because we don't respond.
Yeah. President Clinton is out with a new book, as you know. And I heard him say that Arafat has said that he should have taken the deal that was offered, and whether you choose at Camp David or at Taba, I mean, the one that was under discussion. So, and he said, I wish I'd taken that deal. Now, whether he said it or not, I don't know, but I heard the president said that's his impression of what Arafat has said. My question to you, would you and Sharon accept that deal today?
No, I think it was a bad deal, and the Prime Minister...
Okay, so under no circumstances is that deal
Well, you know why it was
possible?
A bad deal? I'll tell you why it was a bad deal. It was a bad deal because as long as Arafat and the group around him continue to rule the Palestinians, what they're really after is not a Palestinian state next to Israel, but a Palestinian state instead of Israel. They want to remove Israel. That's why he didn't accept the deal, because he said it's not enough. I want Tel Aviv. I want Haifa. I want to be able to flood Israel with millions of Palestinians and effectively end its life. So making concessions...
So you're pulling out of Gaza now because you want to make sure that there's a two-state solution, not a one-state solution.
Well,
right?
we want to make sure... I think we want to... We want to reduce the friction, but I think that we don't intend to pull out of Israel.
How about the West? Well,
in the West Bank, I think President Bush said something of monumental importance.
Which was?
He said that since 1967, there have been demographic changes. So now Tel Aviv has suburbs that go beyond the pre-1967 line. Jerusalem has suburbs. There are places there 100,000 Jews live, no Arabs. And he said that in a final settlement would have to take into consideration these demographic changes. The main thing
But also
is,
there's been some talk of some other kind of exchange of land so that you take account to those settlements and bring it back into some kind of proportion.
Charlie, let me tell you this.
That's the argument that was part of
Let me tell you something that would surprise you. I have no doubt that an agreement between Israel and the Palestinians is possible once the attempt to wipe Israel off the map is removed from the table, not just rhetorically, but in the hearts of the people, of the Palestinians. This conflict is sustained and doesn't get resolved because it serves the purpose of our destruction. When you find Arab leaders like the late Anwar Sadat or the late King Hussein of Jordan, who are willing to make a real deal with Israel, to turn to their peoples and say, no more war, to face up to the Islamic militants, possibly at their own personal risk. When we find such
accept the idea
leaders,
of a two-state solution.
Yes.
Within recognized and secure borders.
Yes, when they say that. Arafat hasn't. But when they do, Israel has made tremendous concessions to them. The problem with Arafat, he's not a Sadat. He's not a King Hussein. He is the champion of the great militant extremism that seeks to wipe us off the map. And that's why we don't have peace, because he doesn't want it.
Let me read you something Tom Friedman said, talking about the withdrawal and historical precedent from Lebanon. The lesson for Israel is clear. If you're going to get out of Gaza unilaterally, get all the way to the UN-based international border. Do not do it halfway. Otherwise, you end up with the worst of all worlds, still embroiled in a guerrilla war, still taking casualties, unable to use your superior firepower and getting blamed for everything. Gaza may be easier than Lebanon, too, because unlike Syria and the Hezbollah, the Palestinian Authority in Egypt would not have an interest after an Israeli pullout in keeping Gaza boiling, because that would empower Hamas. It goes on to say that Israel should take the high ground and get out all the way.
Yeah, well, it might work out the way he describes it. Then again, there's the fear that you get out, and it's not only Hamas that is there, but Al-Qaeda that flows in, that Hezbollah flows in. They're all, Hezbollah supports Hamas openly, and with weapons, techniques. They now use the same techniques. And weapons will flow in from the Sinai through an unprotected seam line between Gaza and the Sinai, the Egyptian Sinai. And then you'd have rockets in Israeli cities, or rockets against Israeli incoming planes. So there's the other side of it. And I think this is why the government made the decision to let's make all the preparations for the pullout, and then decide if we are ready to pull out, if we do it in stages or in one fell swoop. There's an argument that is presented by some along Tom Friedman's lines, and there are others who say we have to be very careful. It's like you want to leave Iraq. Why don't you just walk out? Why don't you get out of Baghdad? Because you're afraid that if you just walk out, you'll have a momentum of terror. Oh, the Americans were driven out by terror. So first we drive them out of Baghdad.
You know, they worry about the precedent, and they also worry about civil war.
Correct. And I think these are all considerations that are difficult. And they're difficult because you have here a fanaticism that knows no bounds. No bounds geographically, and no bounds in its use of violence. Horrific, horrendous, barbaric. I'll tell you what you hear in the Arab press. It's kind of interesting in the Palestinian press. They say, look, we drove the Jews out of Lebanon with terror. We're now going to drive the Jews out of Gaza with terror. We'll then drive them out of the West Bank with terror, and we'll drive them out of Tel Aviv with terror. The subtleties, the nuances, the learned treatises that we engage in and read in and discuss among ourselves, believe me, if you're a Hamas terrorist, you don't care for that. You say, who's winning? Who's advancing? Who's retreating? Therefore, I suggested to the Prime Minister that if we leave, we have to assure three things. One, we control all entry points to Gaza so that weapons are not brought into the terrorists. Second, that President Bush makes it clear, as he did in a historic statement, that the so-called right of return, the flooding of Israel with refugees, will never take place. So you can be encouraged as much as you want, Hamas or Hezbollah, but your ultimate goal of flooding Israel with millions of Palestinians will not happen because this one superpower in the world says it won't happen. And the third thing I said is, those suburbs of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem that are beyond the former pre-1967 line, put a fence around them. And in many ways, President Bush has said that we'd have to, we're not going to uproot here hundreds of thousands of people. And we certainly don't, nobody's talking about uprooting Arabs. And why should you uproot Jews?
But Ariel Sharon, who had more than anybody else to do with creating the settlements, has said he's willing to disband settlements.
Yes, those settlements in Gaza, because they're a tiny minority among a very large, whatever, million Palestinians.
There is precedent for disbanding settlements, as it was in the Sinai.
Exactly, but you're right. But there isn't a precedent of dismantling 100,000 people. There's 3,000 people, 5,000 people. I think that we'll have to carve out a map. I think that's the easy part, as hard as it seems. Because I think once you have a partner, as we've seen with Egypt, once we have a partner, as we've seen with Jordan, you have peace. It's when you don't have a partner that you're under the duress of acting unilaterally in such a way that you don't encourage the forces of militancy and hatred and war and terror on the other side. And that is what we're going to decide in a few months in the government. And I think there's, I'm actually very hopeful because I think we do have the high ground. Maybe not on in all audiences, but I think the world is beginning to see what kind of terror we've been facing, what kind of mad criminality, suicide kindergarten camps. And that is really the obstacle to peace. It's not what Israel does. It's the fact that it breathes, that it exists. And it's not what you do. It's the fact that you have a free, open, pluralistic society that is anathema to these mad people.
The Finance Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. Back in a moment. Stay with us.